Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Bruges. In Bruges, players are trying to gain influence in the blossoming city of Bruges. Let's jump right in with the description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks.
This is Bruges, set up for a two-player game. To set up, each player picks a color and places their small seal on the guardhouse in front of them, but they keep their big seal in front of them to identify who they are. Each player takes 5 money and 1 worker in each of the 5 colors, and then puts one of their pawns in the town hall and one of them on the 5 space of the scoring track. The statues are placed in the central space in descending order from top to bottom, so the 7 is on top and the 2 is on the bottom. And then you shuffle all 165 cards and divide them into 5 equal stacks of 33. Depending on the number of players, you take that many stacks and shuffle them together. So we were 2 players, so we took 2 of those 5 stacks, shuffled them together, and then formed 2 equal stacks. Regardless of the number of players, you always form 2 equal stacks. The remaining cards always form an extra draw pile that will be used at the end of the game. The remaining money, workers, and threat tokens and canal tokens form a general supply, and then we can start the game. The game is played in rounds composed of 4 phases: draw cards, roll the dice, play cards, and verify the majorities. And the game normally ends the round that one of these piles runs out and is replaced by this stack, but there's one exception to that we'll explain in a little bit. First, we'll go through the game turn, and we'll start with the draw cards phase. So in clockwise order, players draw back up to 5 cards. So the first turn of the game, they're just going to draw 5. They take cards one at a time from either of the 2 stacks without looking at them, and then can look at them all once they have a hand back up at 5. So they can proceed to take 1 card from this, another card from this, and then move on to the next stack if they'd like to, and they can alternate back and forth between those stacks as much as they like. So after the first player, that is the player who has this marker, goes back up to 5 cards, the next player in clockwise order does the same thing until all players have returned to 5 cards. If while drawing a pile ever runs out, you immediately replace it with the extra cards that were set aside. If a second pile runs out, you split the remaining pile in half so that there's 2 more stacks that players can draw from. Also, it's important to note that emptying a pile will trigger the end of the game, and we'll describe that in more detail later. The next phase is rolling the dice, so the start player takes all the dice and rolls them on the board. They are sorted in the indicated spaces in number order, and any 5s and 6s among them trigger threat markers. So in this example, we have a 6 or a 5 in brown, yellow, and red, so all players are going to receive a red, yellow, and brown threat marker. If a player ever receives 3 threat markers of the same color, they immediately resolve the penalty, and after suffering a penalty, a player returns all 3 threat markers of that color to the supply. After resolving threat markers, players have 1 opportunity to advance on the reputation track, and they do that by paying the total amount of money equal to the 1s and 2s rolled. So in this example, we have 2 1s, so 1 plus 1 is 2. So red player goes first because he's the first player. He could pay 2 money and advance 1 space. He cannot advance multiple spaces, and it's totally optional to do so. And then after he does it, yellow has the same opportunity. And it's important to note that it's not the number of dice, it's the value of the dice. So if it was 1 plus 2, you'd have to pay 3 to advance 1 space on the reputation track. It's also important to note that if no 1s or 2s are rolled at all, you cannot advance on the reputation track that turn. The next phase in the crux of the game is the play cards and perform actions phase. It starts with the start player, and players take turns playing 1 card and then proceeding clockwise. Once all players have played 4 cards, the phase is going to be over. There's 6 possible actions a player can take, and all cards can perform all actions. The first is to take 2 workers. So if you use this card to take workers, you would take 2 brown workers. You always take 2 workers, and you always take them of the color of the card in question. When you use a card this way, it's just discarded from the game. And the next action you can do is to take money. So if you were to discard a yellow card, you look at the value of the die that corresponds with the same color. So in this case, you discard this card and you would take 6 money. But if you discard a purple card to take money, you would only get 2 money. The next action is to discard a threat marker. So you just get rid of a threat marker of the same color as the card you played. So you would play this, discard it, and you would get rid of a yellow threat marker. So if you had a yellow threat marker in front of you, you discard it. And every time in the game you get rid of a threat marker, you get 1 point. Except for when you get the 3rd one and have to activate it and then return them the supply. You don't get any points for that. So you remove the threat marker and you just move up 1 point in the track. The next thing you can do is build a canal, and you can see that players start with 2 canal lines on either side of their start seal. So this player could build a blue canal or a brown canal at this time. Once this was already built, then they could build a purple one, and so on and so forth. When you build a 3rd canal of a type, you're going to get 3 points at the end of the game. If you complete a set of 5, you immediately take a statue, but you don't score the statue until the end of the game. So to build a canal, you discard a card of the corresponding color. In this case, if he wants to build this blue canal, he has to discard a blue card and then pay the value on that space. So he'd discard the blue card and he'd pay 1, and then he just puts a canal token there. And in the future, he could build the yellow, or also he could always build that brown one as well. You can always build 2 different directions at once. And the next action you can do is you could build a house. So you take a card and you have to discard a worker of the same color. So this is a red house, so I would get rid of a red worker and I would put this in front of me. And this now allows me to recruit people to that house. Which brings us to the final action, which is recruit a person. So you would take a person and you would play them to an empty house. They don't have to match the color of the house, but each house can only hold 1 one person. You pay the cost in the upper corner. This one happens to cost 0, but a lot of them have a cost, like this one here would be 3 money that you'd have to pay to recruit him. People with an arrow, like this person here, are immediately activated, but most of the cards you have to activate at different times during your turn. So if you had this guy, you could activate him once per round, either before or after you play a card, and you do that by paying 1 brown. So you get rid of a brown, and then you would use his effect. There's also some with this infinity effect that are either always in effect, or they can activate once per round for a very low cost. There's also some types of people that have an effect that only occurs at the end of the game, and their symbol is a laurel symbol that looks like this. So they're only in effect at the end of the game. They're usually related to scoring points. So after everybody's played 4 cards and taken 4 actions, we move on to the verify majorities phase. And every player starts the game with 3 majorities face down in front of them. You can see these 3 here, so they're actually red in color, but they're going to all start face down at the game. So this one is the reputation, which you always check first. If one person is the farthest ahead on the reputation track, they're going to get to flip that, and so they're going to score points for it at the end of the game. And then you check people. If one person has more people in his houses than anybody else, they would get to flip that one. And lastly is if one person has more canals than anyone else. And remember, tying doesn't count as having the most. And once these are flipped, they can never be flipped back, even if somebody passes you later, but they are worth points at the end of the game for having them flipped. After you finish checking majorities, the start player token passes 1 space clockwise, and the next round is going to begin. If a draw pile ever empties during the draw phase or the first phase of a turn, the game is going to end that round. Remember, you still replace it with this so players can continue drawing as normal. However, if the draw pile empties during the action phase, when a player has to draw a card from a card effect, the game ends at the end of the next round. That's the one exception. At the end of the game, there's a final scoring to determine the winner, and everybody gets points for their persons. You can see underneath the cost, all the persons have a different value. And then each house you've built is worth 1 point, and there is a 1 on each one, just to remind you of that. Also, certain people with the laurel symbol give you various benefits that you calculate at this time, and you get 4 points for each flipped majority marker you have. Also, you get points depending how far you built your canal. Remember, 3 in each direction is worth 3 points, and the 5th one gets you a statue, which scores that many points at the end of the game. And then depending where you are in the reputation track, you score the corresponding number of points, and whoever has the most points wins. Let's get going with this example playthrough. So the red player is going to go first because he is the first player token, so he draws up to 5 cards. He decides he's going to take this one. He doesn't get to look at them yet, but he would like a purple one. Then he decides to take from over here, and then here, and then, okay, great, a brown one. So he's at 5 cards. Now he can certainly look at them, and then the other player goes. So he's going to take this one first. Okay, so they're both at 5 cards, so they can look at their hands. Normally it'd be for their eyes only, but we're going to put them face up here to make it a little bit easier to see. So the second part of the turn is to roll the dice. So the start player rolls all the dice, and then they're organized from lowest to highest on these spaces of the track. And the first thing we do is the threat markers. So we know everybody gets a blue, a brown, and a purple threat marker. So they take those in front of them. Now that everybody has their threat markers and nobody has 3 of one type, none of the penalties happen. But the next thing we do is the reputation track. So it would cost 3 to advance on the reputation track. It's red's choice first. He decides he is going to pay the 3 money, and he goes up to the 1. And then yellow's turn. He decides he's also going to pay that 3 money and go up to the 1 space as well. Now we go to the play cards phase, and it's going to start with red, and the players are going to alternate taking turns playing cards. The first thing red's going to do is discard this purple card, and he's going to do it to get money, and because there's a 6 showing here, he's going to take 6 money from the bank. And now it's yellow's turn, so he picks one of his cards and he does something with it. And he decides to do something similar by discarding a blue guy, but he only gets 5 money because there's a 5 showing there. And then it goes back to red, and for his second action he decides to build a red house. And he does that by getting rid of a red worker because this is a red card, and he just puts that face down in front of him. It is now a house, so he could theoretically put one of his people there in a later move. And it goes back to yellow, who now takes another turn, and we proceed like this until each player has taken 4 actions. For yellow's second action, he decides to play this card and use it to build a yellow canal. So he discards a yellow card because this is a yellow canal, and he has to pay 1 money. So he gets rid of the card, and he puts a canal here. We're going to jump back to the end of the round so you can see what that looks like. For the last action of the round, yellow's going to play this guy to an empty house. Remember, each house can only have 1 guy, and the cost is 3 because that's what it says here, so he pays that. And now we move on to the verification phase. So we first check if anybody has the most reputation. Both players have the same level of reputation, so nobody gets to flip that one. Next, we check if any player has the most people. Both players have 1 person, so nobody gets to flip that either. However, this guy has 1 canal and this guy has 0, so the yellow player will get to flip this up, and no matter what happens now, it's going to be flipped face up for the rest of the game. Now that the round is over, the start player passes 1 place clockwise, which is just to the other player here, and they're going to perform another round, starting again with the draw phase. We'll be back at the end of the game to see what that looks like. Welcome back. It's almost the end of the game. This player just drew back up to 5 cards because he's the start player of this turn. So this guy's going to do it. He's going to draw 1, 2, 3, and now this deck is out, so we know this is the last round of the game, and then for his fourth one, he's just going to draw from over here. So at the conclusion of this turn, the game is going to be over, and we're going to calculate the final score. The game is over because we finished the round and one of the draw piles ran out, and the final score has already been calculated. The way you calculate it is you add up the value on each person below their cost, so everybody has a certain value associated with them, and then each house is worth 1 point. So for instance, this guy had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points in houses, and then certain guys with the laurel symbol score points at the end of the game. This guy gave his owner 1 point for every threat marker he still possessed, which happened to be 7 threat markers, so it was worth a lot of points. Next, each player got 4 points for each majority token they flipped over. This guy had flipped over 2 of them. Unfortunately, that guy hadn't flipped over any, so he got no points there. And then players scored points based on where they are in the canals. Neither of these guys really built the canal, so no points were awarded there. And lastly, wherever they are in the reputation track, they get that many points. So both of these guys would have got 4 points for the reputation track. And whoever has the most points wins, which in our case was the yellow player.
I really enjoy playing Bruges. I love how there's so many different things you can do with each card, and the only real difference between them is the color and the abilities. But the abilities are so varied that it really does matter what decisions you make, and it can be very satisfying to get a good combination out on the board. The other side of that, though, is it can be very frustrating at times because there's so many cards in the game, but you're only personally going to see such a small percentage of them, and you don't have a great deal of control over which ones you get because you're only picking on the back based on color. There's definitely some cards that are better than others and some cards that are better in combinations with others. So there's definitely a luck of the draw element there, maybe a little higher than I would like for the weight of this game, but the game plays very fast, and it's very fun to just decide what to do with all the different cards and see how they interact. That it's a small quibble, but it definitely matters to some people who, like a really strategic game. So if this one looked fun to you, check it out. That's Bruges.